Today I'm working on a 2012 Chrysler Town & Country with a 3.6 liter V6. And this is going to be a real quick overview. This isn't going to be an absolute step-by-step on how to do this, but this thing has an oil leak, a pretty nasty oil leak. And I noticed it when I was changing the oil on it the other day, and it is really wet. It actually is wetter towards the backside, but it's really wet underneath, specifically the transmission, but it's not transmission fluid that's leaking. I'm already into this a little bit here, but if you can see down in here, and you can't see great, but you can kind of see a little bit, it's just wet with oil all around the transmission, on top of it and everything. Just pretty well soaked here, and it's all coming off the engine. And I've run into this a few times, so I didn't have to take it apart to diagnose it. It's the oil filter cooler housing assembly that's the problem here. So we've got one on hand, and I'm already into this. I've pulled the intake boot off. This elbow assembly is what pushes on in the back. There's one pin in the front, and then it just slides onto the throttle body. And the boot itself has a couple hose clamps that go on either side. So anyways, you got that pulled out. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to pull the plenum off. There are, I think it's 8 bolts varying back and forth here, bolting this down. There's 2 10mm nuts on studs here, and in the front there's going to be another 2 studs with 10mm nuts, and they go on these brackets. I've already got this apart, but they go on these brackets. So the trick with these brackets, that bracket, you need to loosen up the bolt down below just enough to get this bracket sloppy like that, so you can slide it off that stud. The reason you need to do that is because basically you've got this plenum captured. You've got studs going that way into brackets, and you got studs going that way into brackets, so you can't lift it up. So you loosen that up, you can flip that down, and then this other one towards the back of the engine, radiator side of the car. This one's a little trickier because you've got a nut you need to take off that holds a coolant hose on. Take that nut off the stud, and then you can loosen that bolt with a stud up, because that's what holds the bottom of this in. Same thing, just get that loose, and then you can pull that off. So we've got that done, and now, and you will see right away that I'm already into this. We'll pull that out of the way. We'll set that aside, and here we go. So we'll pull that off. I've already got the injectors and the coil packs all unplugged, and those harnesses flipped off to the side here. I'm also doing spark plugs. As long as we're in here, you got a bit of time just getting to the spark plugs, which is of course not the point of the job here, but it makes sense to just change out the spark plugs as long as we're in here. So now the next thing to do is I'm going to unbolt the lower intake, and the fuel rails are going to come out with it. You don't need to unbolt the fuel rails from the intake, but the next thing I'm going to do, I've got some paper towels stuffed in here, and I'm going to blow everything out here before I pull this off, just to make sure. You can see there's some debris down in here, and we want to get all that out of here so we don't drop anything down into the cylinder head ports once we get the intake out of here. So that's what we need to do to get to the oil filter housing cooler assembly. So I've blown everything off here. Again, I plugged all these to not get any crud in there. It was really good to blow this off. There was a lot of crud that I blew off the top of the engine. So now I'm going to disconnect the fuel line here. It's just a little quick connector, which you can pretty easily disconnect with a pick. So that's what we're going to do. And then I've got a paper towel below it just to catch any fuel, and expect it to spray. It might not, but if you expect it to spray, it's not going to get you in the face, hopefully. All right, really no spraying going on. So we can set that aside, and then we can zip all of these 8mm. I actually loosened up one already, but we're gonna zip the rest of these 8mm bolts loose, and then we can lift this out of here. So as I was doing this, it really started dumping a lot of fuel out there. So definitely not bad to have something there to catch it. Now we should be able to pull this whole assembly out, and that's gonna come right out real easy and continue to dump fuel. Now you can see we have access to the cooler. So the next thing I'm gonna do is unplug the two sensors from the housing assembly. I was able to just put my thumb underneath. There's no lock or anything like that, so I could just put my thumb underneath and release it and pull it out. So we've got the sensors out of there. We also have a coolant line. So here's one of the tools I'm gonna use, this clamp, and I'm gonna put that right on this hose out a little ways where I have easy access. The hose that goes to the cooler housing. And then I've got this tool, the hose clamp tool, and this is gonna be able to sneak down in here and get to the hose clamp that's mounted in a tough spot to reach. So I know you can't see it great on camera here, but I know you can see one of the tabs. So we're just gonna reach in here. Sometimes it's easier to do this once you unbolt the whole cooler assembly. That is an option. You can unbolt that whole thing and lift it up. So if I don't have any luck fairly easily with this, we're gonna pretty much go straight to that. We will lose a little bit of coolant here, but because I've got it clamped off, not very much. Okay, so we're ready to unbolt the whole housing. So I've got an external Torx bit here, just like the upper bolts are 8mm. This is also an 8, but it's an E8 external Torx. I've got 5 bolts here. So on this end, there's 2 tubes that go down inside the engine block. So that's what we're working with, trying to pull those out. Maybe we'll, there we go. So then we can lift this up. I'm gonna flip it, and there you go. So if we go down in here, you can see how flooded this is. So I'm gonna try and clean this out. I'm actually gonna use my brake bleeder to suck all that oil out of it. There's 2 reasons I wanted to make this video. One was to kind of show you the symptoms of it, because you can't really see exactly where it's leaking, but if it's leaking down the back side of the engine onto the top of the transmission, this is probably what you got going on. And the second reason is because this is the first time I've done this job, and I might be behind on this, but I haven't seen an all metal housing yet until now. So luckily they've got that option now. So we're gonna be replacing this old one, which of course has some aluminum where the cooler is, but then there's just a lot of plastic around there and the whole filter housing. The new one has a plastic cap, but other than that, it's a full metal assembly. It comes with new sensors and everything. So I'm excited about this because this should be the last one that ever goes on this engine. I have done a lot of these, and I've even done them more than once on a single engine. So this is gonna be a great upgrade. So I've sucked a bunch of oil out of here. There's still just crud down below. Doesn't look real great, but there's not a good way to clean that out. So we're just gonna, we got the standing oil out of there. I probably pulled a pint out of there, so we're gonna just leave that as is. I wanted to go back to this new part here. I'll put a link in the description, an affiliates link, but this is the first time I've purchased this part, but it is really nice. Like there's no sharp edges on the casting. Even on the vehicle itself, there's a bunch of nasty edges on all the castings. And this thing just really seems like a top-notch part. So I am confident this will be the last one that ever goes in this thing. This is nice to see that there's a solution to fix the problem. And it comes with new intake gaskets and new bolts for bolting that assembly in. So again, link in the description. But yeah, this is gonna be a real nice upgrade on this thing. So here's our new part. Got all the surfaces cleaned up nice down in there. And you know, I think we're gonna try and go the easy route on this. And I'm going to take this coolant hose. So here's our clamp. We're gonna slide in. We'll slide this onto the new cooler assembly. And then we can get this positioned perfectly and easily. Then we've got our 2 harnesses, and it looks like this lower sensor is now clocked so that you do have access to the release clip. And then we got that upper one and the collar that locks it in place. So that worked out quite well for that. Now we're gonna work this back and forth and get that one tube down into the engine block. Now that's all lined up nice. That really went quite easy. I'm always a little leery on the plastic ones. Get all those snug. And now I'm gonna move on to the spark plugs. I'm not even gonna get that on video here. It's spark plugs, but we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna continue to put everything together. So I've got the lower intake ready to go here. I've got the new O-rings that came with the cooler kit all installed here. The last thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to just mist some silicone spray over all the gasket surfaces there so that the gaskets can move around and just set on there right, and they won't get folded over or bent funny or anything like that. So then we can flip this over. You can hear the bolts all flopping back and forth. They're captured in here, so they're not going to go anywhere. Then we're going to finish off by hand, alternating around. Nope, I'm going to do the same thing as this. So we've got everything all buttoned up here. So the last thing we're gonna do is set the engine cover on here, pop that in, and then of course, I would suggest probably changing the oil. It's not mandatory, but if you did get any cross-contamination, if any coolant went down to the oil passageway, it would be good to change the oil. If you don't change the oil, you're gonna need to top off the oil because you're probably gonna be down a quart or so between what I probably already leaked plus what you took out with the housing and with the old filter. The new housing does come with a new filter, so you don't need to fool with that, but make sure you add oil or change the oil, and then you're good to go. No more oil leak, hopefully, forever. So we've got everything buttoned up on it. Everything's looking good. It's full of oil, so it's ready to go out on the road. Thanks for watching.